Hello everyone, I'm James Rosen.
And I'm Dave Kemble, and this is the Practicus
Digital Transformation Podcast. Hello everybody, welcome to the latest edition of the Practicus Digital Transformation Podcast. Today we're joined by Kate Holden. Kate is a highly accomplished leader with executive board experience and a significant track record of driving profitable growth through digital transformation, strategic partnerships and large-scale program delivery. This has resulted in award-winning digital products with some of the most respected global brands, including RELX PLC, Pearson PLC and the Financial Times. Today, we'll explore what it takes to build winning teams and deliver digital transformations successfully. Welcome, Kate. So, Kate, first question, what does digital mean to you?
Well, firstly, hi, James and Dave, and thank you very much for inviting me. And what a rich question to start with, I guess. So digital for me is about technology and data as a means to an end. And when you think about how much technology and data has impacted our lives as consumers and as professionals, it's been coming for years, but with the pandemic, it has been immense. And so at the business specifically, I think it's about using technology and data to do things better, to do better things or to change things, but always with an eye on delivering value to the business. So thinking about what's changing in the market, whether it's user needs that are changing, the competitive landscape, and using that technology and data to understand what you need to drive within the business to enhance the user experience, to deliver better products and drive change that would deliver value. So very much a means to an end.
Fantastic. That's really interesting and echoes, I think, a lot of the thoughts that we've had so far, that you should always have an idea of why you're trying to change the way you work and what you're trying to achieve from digital.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's really important to ask yourself the question of why. What's the business rationale for driving change? Because change can be quite disruptive for a business, and it can be quite uncomfortable for a number of people, frightening even, and it certainly carries risk. Change carries risk, and so understanding up front what technology can do for your business as an enabler, I think that's really what's at the heart of digital and digital transformation for me.
Absolutely. Now, you've been working in change and transformation for a large proportion of your career, Kate. Have you seen a fundamental difference in the way that digital transformation programs are run versus other types of large organizational transformations?
Well, you know, when I think about traditional organizations, they're typically organized by functions, and functions can work in silos. So digital transformation is often interpreted as a technology program, an IT project, and more often than not could be led by the head of technology, a CIO or a CTO, whereas an organizational change, you apply the lens of, well, it's about people and structure. So the head of HR should lead that. So often I think the tendency is to run these with a functional lens as a fundamental change. But what I've seen and sort of research suggests, and sort of my experience, is actually most successful transformations are those that are run cross-functionally. And the leaders who run those understand that the transformation touches process, technology, people, culture, regardless of whether its focus is on technology and digital or more on organizational change. And so understanding how to work collaboratively across multiple functions and think through the transformation end to end, I think is what's at the heart of it, as opposed to think about them as distinctly functional efforts with led by individuals that work and run them as pure IT or pure HR efforts.
So it's understanding the impact that it's going to have on everybody that's going to be involved in that process, and how it filters down and changes their world.
Absolutely. And if you think about talent, you're going to need capabilities across a number of different areas to drive change, whether it be organizational or digital. And so it encourages us all, I think, working on change to think about it more in a multidimensional, cross-functional approach and seek the collaboration of our colleagues and understand the common areas that we need to work together, even if the specific focus, if you like, is to upgrade a system. So let's just talk about, moving SAP from on-prem to the cloud. Well, that the deliverable may sit firmly inside the technology, but actually the impact of that change is going to be quite substantial, probably to the finance teams, to the sales teams, to the marketing teams. So that project and change needs to include talent and capabilities from those functions. And so I think it's far more important to look at these changes end to end and not sort of restrict them inside their own functions and silos.
It's interesting you mention SAP, because James and I have supported numerous ERP transformations, and you're right, that seems to be the challenge. A lot of the time, companies will go in and it's led purely by technology or led purely by finance. And it, as you mentioned right at the beginning, change is scary. But change isn't scary if you feel you're part of it. Change is only scary when it's done to you. And it's about including everybody on that journey, because otherwise you don't get the adoption rates.
That's right. And very often people think, well, is my job at risk?
Yeah.
And is this, can I use this new technology, or is my role going to be eliminated as a result? And they often run to those conclusions in the absence of communication and understanding, and inviting them to understand that actually this may be a fantastic opportunity for them to learn some new skills, or it may actually help them to be more efficient and more productive and therefore more successful. And so in the absence of communication, people may just think the worst.
It's so important to get that communication piece, right from the start, isn't it, actually? And in fact, I think that leads us on nicely to my next question, Kate. One of the things that we discussed last time we were together before we started recording was, how do organizations and teams go about achieving, successful digital transformations? And you alluded to a framework or a kind of a step-by-step process that you typically try to put in place. Could you tell us about that in more detail?
Yes. So I'm the sort of person who has a strong curiosity and passion about technology and innovation, and I'm a lifelong learner. And so I go back to my early career where I had the opportunity to get involved with change and transformation very early on. And the things that I've learned there, I think, have been foundational in helping me continue to work in this space. And I'm thinking specifically around Financial Times and RELX PLC, two organizations that have great brands, very long legacy, and both have been able to transition and transform very successfully. The Financial Times has over a million readership, I think, 3/4 of whom are digital subscribers, paying digital subscribers. And I was recently reading an article where RELX was described as Britain's most successful digital transformation. Now, these transformations didn't happen overnight. Both companies really embraced the web, if you like, some 20 years ago. So they've been in the making for quite some time. And I was fortunate enough to work at the start of those change programs with both of these organizations. And I've learned to start by asking three very specific questions before any change. The first is, why are we doing this? What's the business rationale? Is it about growing your market share? Is it about improving your customer experience? Is it about taking out lots of cost within the business, modernizing, and being more operationally efficient? Let's be clear around why. And the second question is, well, what should we do specifically? And I think very quickly, it's important to understand what might be the 3 or 4 bold initiatives that will really help drive the right activity. And then the third question is around how are we actually going to implement, which is around ways of working. And so these 3 questions for me are really important to encourage organizations to spend some quality time really discussing at the CEO and the senior leadership team and get that right. And from that, I've developed a sort of a 6-step process, if you like, which I use time and time again. So the first one is very much around the vision, having a real North Star about why you're doing it, and one that you can express with utter conviction. And the second area is around ownership. For large change, it's important that the CEO and the senior team are behind it, and they are supporting it visibly. They're able to communicate it consistently and build that sort of confidence in the organization that this change is the right direction and it's going to be helping us to grow, and everybody's going to be part of that. The third area, I think, is around prioritization. When you start thinking about change, very quickly you can come up with a very long list of really quite large pieces of work to do, and that can be quite overwhelming. And I think ruthless prioritization is actually what's needed at the start of these programs. And so I use something that I call managing for value. So I use data to things like, what's happening in the market, what do users and clients want, how have their needs and wants changed, if you like, what does the competitive landscape tell us? And that helps us to distill down those initiatives and programs that will really have the biggest impact. There'll be lots that probably are worthy doing at some point, but it is worth asking the question, should we not do those or stop or pause some of them for now and focus on probably no more than sort of 3 to 5 bold initiatives that will have the biggest impact.
And Kate, do you monitor then the data? Do you continue to collect data as you go? Because obviously the world moves at a very fast pace these days. Is there a potential risk that when you set out on the transformation, that by the time you get to the end of it, actually people's views and ways of working and wanting the services of a particular company have changed? What I'm asking is, how often do you collect that data?
I guess nowadays it's quite easy. There are a lot of tools that allow you to collate data on an ongoing basis and actually stay very much in tune with your users and your clients. And so I would include that as part of what I call agile execution. So rather than work in the analogous way of building products that would take a very long time to get the fully finished product, nowadays we have proof of concepts, we can get MVPs out the door, and that's a fantastic way to get feedback early on, engage the users and make them feel part of that change. But also that helps you understand whether you need to adapt your priorities or the scope or the design of the solution that you're building, or indeed if there's been something extraordinary like a pandemic, then you may just need to kind of pause momentarily and course correct if that's what's required to do. So I think that comes down in the ways of working that you introduce as part of the change.
So after the data's been analysed and monitored and the prioritisation has been kind of set out and clear, what's next? in your framework?
Well, resources, sort of financial resources, of course. There needs to be, a budget and likely to be a business case, depending on how organizations make decisions. And then I think, obviously, the human resources. What capabilities do you need to deliver on this? And more often than not, you may find that you need to bring in some additional expertise. You may need to retrain and develop some of the individuals within the organization. But getting that mix of capability right is very much core to helping you get moving, if you like, with the change. And then the fifth area is what I mentioned just now, agile execution, really, and thinking how to change the mindset. If the change is worth doing, it's probably worth doing at pace. And so understanding where decisions are being made, at what level, how quickly, how you can empower your teams to make decisions at the execution level, how to create a governance and reporting, and also how to measure, I guess, this project is important. So adopting new ways of working, I think, is really part and parcel of managing that change. And then the kind of last but not least, the sort of final step of the process is communication. And then there needs to be communication at the start, there needs to be communication in the middle, there needs to be communication at the end. So pretty much consistently throughout, communication up the organization. And by that, I mean at the CEO and the board level, they need to be aware of the progress. They need to have the opportunity perhaps to provide guidance, direction, or oversight of the budget decisions across the organization. These are stakeholders and influencers that need to be on board to continue with the message, to continue to evolve the organization in understanding the change, and then communication down across all the ranks, regardless of the level of seniority. Because if this change is impacting the business, then arguably every single role, every single person in that business needs to understand what their role is in that, or how are they going to benefit, and how are they going to support it, as Dave was saying earlier on. How can they buy into it and see it as a positive rather than as a negative?
And would you bring internal comms in then towards the beginning of any program or towards the end?
Very much at the beginning, yes. Because along the way, there's going to be challenges. There's going to be obstacles. This change programs don't run linearly. All sorts of things come along way that can derail the project. But also there are small wins along the way. And that's where communications is really important, so that you're encouraging the team and they're feeling confident and they have the conviction that what they're doing is making a difference. And that creates excitement, it creates energy, creates a buzz. And so the communication aspects needs to run through consistently. And I for me, it's like you cannot communicate enough, because, communication is education and education is communication.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Very nice.
And we've talked about earlier the various definitions of digital or interpretations of digital and what it means to different people. Now, with the complexities of a digital transformation program, how do you go about measuring success of a program?
I feel so passionate about this. I really do, guys. And because for me, a digital transformation is about delivering business value, and less about new code. Exciting though that might be for those that are developing and designing architectures and writing the code. But and typically measurements tend to kind of focus on cost efficiencies and risk avoidance as opposed to value. So let me tell you a little story. When I was working at, I give RELX as an example again, the transformation program centered around the legal division, the LexisNexis business. It was a 5-year program with a budget of over $100 million. So naturally had very strong oversight and interest, not only from the divisional CEO, but from the group CEO as well. And so I was often invited to present to him directly, to the group CEO, on the progress of what was called the Rosetta program. And in our very first meeting, he looked me straight in the eye and he said, Kate, tell me, how is this product going to be demonstrably superior? Demonstrably superior. I have never forgotten that. Needless to say, I didn't have a great answer on our first meeting. So, but quickly we, went back, we worked with the team, and we really sort of challenged ourselves to understand how we're going to measure, what does success look like? How are we going to measure progress, and how we're going to, report back to the group CEO? Now, I think, again, you don't need, 20, 30 metrics. You probably need 3 to 5 key ones. And this may vary slightly from one company to another, but I broadly put them into 3 buckets, if you like. The first, and really importantly, is around customer metrics. And that could be around the customer experience. So a net promoter score may be appropriate, but also brand equity might be the right metric, or indeed a user lifetime value. Then the second bucket is around the financials, which might be around revenue growth as well as cost efficiencies, but revenue and digital adoptions or subscription uptake, return on investment using specific financial metrics driven perhaps with, in collaboration with your finance partner. And then the third bucket is around employees, and that could be around an employee net promoter score that I've seen done before, or it could be around technology talent, the talent that's been attracted, promoted, retained. It could be the percentage of time of digital apps to market. And one other thing that I've used in the past successfully is percentage of leaders' incentives linked to digital. So,
that's interesting.
Yeah, because that can again drive the right sort of behaviors, if you like, and improve and increase collaboration across functions, back to that sort of multidimensional approach to a transformation. So certainly, if 4 to 6 metrics across customers and sort of hard financials, if you like, and some appropriate employee ones. And those would probably be relevant at the senior level. Arguably at the individual project level, you may have some very specific detailed ones, if you like, which, if you're using Agile, that there could be, around that methodology. But at the at the senior level, you need to have a handful that are really meaningful for that organization, and they really help you monitor and inform the progress you're making and what changes or corrections you may need to apply to the program to sort of make sure you get back on track, because these programs tend to be over a concerted period of time as opposed to just a few weeks and months. So I think having those metrics understood and used throughout the life of the program would really help determine at the end, have you delivered on the original business benefits?
When you start out, you obviously have the vision of why we're doing this, which is great. Have you ever experienced residual increase in any of those metrics which you weren't expecting?
How do you mean residual increase?
So if you start out, for example, you say we're doing this because we want to improve the customer metrics, the net promoter scores, and we want to get a better return on investment. But actually, as a result, then you find that the employee net promoter scores are 10 times better. The time spent is much more efficient. Do you ever find that there's something that you didn't consider that suddenly improves?
Yes. I think that's a great point you're making, Dave, because if you inspire the organization and you galvanize the organization behind that change, you will absolutely get supplementary benefits, if you like, that you didn't articulate up front, because people feel more energized. They're suddenly more creative. They may feel inspired to come forward with new ideas for new products and services. And generally you create a buzz of, this is an exciting place. I want to be part of this journey because it feels good and I'm actually making a difference. And so you can create a very, very positive environment, I think, if on the back of driving this change. And of course, it comes down to how you communicate and having the alignment at the top, having your CEO regularly express this as part of the overall business strategy, that it isn't seen as a separate, IT program, tucked away inside a siloed function, but it is visible. It is, it is part of the business strategy. And so that creates tremendous energy, I think, down the organization and across the organization. Yeah.
Earlier on, Kate, you spoke about the if something's worth doing, it's worth doing at pace. And obviously with, again, we were linking sort of back to the pandemic. One of the questions I was going to ask you as well was, have you seen recently the need for digital transformation being accelerated, and if so, do you have any kind of views or experience on how successful these accelerated transformation programs have been?
The short answer is yes. I think the pandemic and sort of coronavirus have accelerated in general the digital strategy formulation. And whereas organizations may have thought we have a business strategy and then we need to prioritize digital at some point, I think there's an increasing awareness that digital is actually part of the business strategy. It's not something that sits separate and outside of your overall business strategy. There's been a lot of research and studies done, as you can imagine, by many companies. I'll just share a few headlines that really sort of underpin the change that we're all experiencing. So McKinsey did a study that suggests that the digital adoption has accelerated by 7 years.
Wow.
And actually in Asia by 10 years. So that's stunning, right? In terms of what's happening all around us. And the World Economic Forum has also found that there's been a 20% surge in internet usage. So, people that didn't know how to use shopping online and, didn't know how to use Zoom and other video conferencing facilities, necessity is the mother of all invention. So we've seen a huge uptake of the web. But also, if you look at it commercially, Accenture have also found that leading companies that have scaled in, technology innovation during the pandemic, their revenues are growing 5 times more than those companies that are lagging behind, which is, really quite extraordinary. And a similar study from BCG says more or less the same thing in slightly different ways, which is digital leaders achieve earnings of 1.8% higher than their laggard leaders, digital laggards, if you like. But in the same study, they also suggest that transformations are more likely to under-deliver and not succeed. And in fact, they quote something like 30% of these transformations succeed, which is very low. But I think the pandemic has provided everyone with a lot more confidence about an organization's ability to drive change quickly. And I've seen certainly working from home, for example, in organizations that had strong presenteeism in the office, if you like, were able to move within a matter of weeks and get laptops out and roll, Office 365 or whatever to enable their employees to work remotely. And of course, what's the benefit that they've seen? Well, there's cost efficiencies, right? Because there's no travel, which has an even bigger benefit on the environment and the climate. People are more productive. There's no commuting time. And I would argue that there's also an increase client interaction, because there's more accessibility to get in touch, because you don't have the timelines used around traveling, cancellation of trains, flights, and so forth. So I think overall what we've learned from the pandemic is that digital needs to be part of your overall business strategy, and actually your culture may be very capable of embracing change and delivering change much faster than perhaps you might have thought otherwise. So what's more important, I think, for leaders now is to think through, how do I maintain the momentum? How do I really keep that energy level of being able to drive change at pace? Because we can do it. We have done it in the last year.
Yeah, fascinating.
That's a really good point as well, Kate, around the kind of uptake of, the productivity levels. I mean, I've seen myself, I was doing some base level analytics on what I've done so far in the sort of, the last year. And I've had more meetings, so far this year than I pretty much had, throughout the most of the previous years face to face, just because it's easy to find 20, 30 minute slots in people's diaries. If they've got, a free slot between their day-to-day standard stuff, then they can just jump on a Teams or a Zoom. So it is I've noticed that as well, actually, a lot more productivity.
Yeah. Mind you burn a lot more calories sprinting across London from meeting to meeting.
You do. But you get to spend less time with your cats, Dave. So it's every cloud.
Absolutely, silver linings. So Kate, with regards to the transformation programs, then how important would you say selecting the right technology is in the success of a program, and who, in your opinion, would take responsibility for the decision of the technology?
Wow, that's a really complex question. You
are welcome.
Thank you for that. I think if you ask 100 people, you probably get 100 slightly different answers.
Sure.
I think, more often, again, typical organizations will rely on the head of technology, a CIO, a CTO to sort of lead perhaps the selection of the technology. I think that's not necessarily a bad thing, but what I would like to see more of is that head of technology is either part of the senior team or is working side by side with the head of strategy or a CMO and the business leaders, so that they genuinely understand the business and how technology is going to deliver competitive advantage. And I think there's a tremendous amount of technology out there for an organization to find the right one. I don't think that's the challenge. The challenge is how to implement it.
Sure.
And I've seen time and time again organizations making the right choices, buying, whether it's SAP or Salesforce.com, buying, renowned, acclaimed software and services, if you like. But the challenge has been in how they go about implementing them and getting the benefits out of those multi-million-pound investments. And, it's not unheard of that most of the programs, tend to sort of go over budget, they overestimate on timelines, and they don't always deliver. And so I think technology is easy to identify, and provided is done as part of the overall business strategy and the business understands what is going to get out of it, then I think whoever sort of makes that ultimate call likely to be someone that is more of a technologist, I'd say, rather than a technical person. I think that's how I make that distinction.
Sure.
That's a good way of phrasing it. And I think actually one of the things that that you've highlighted already is that, because you've worked for some pretty large, global, well-known organizations, and often we've experienced before these digital transformations, they often, it's not unheard of for them not to get off to the smoothest start, and there's a lot of teething issues, along the way. Have you ever, experienced or been asked to deliver a transformation where there has just been, disproportionate risk versus reward? How would you kind of approach that conversation? What would you do? I suppose is what I'm trying to get at, Kate.
Yeah, well, we talked earlier on that, change carries risk. And I think anyone leading change and the teams working on change probably feel that risk quite intensely because change, it can be exciting for some people and very frightening and for others. So understanding how to create the right conditions for success is really part and parcel of where you start, I think. Now, an example that springs to mind is when I was working for a very large global publishing organization. And at the time, I was the MD of the EMEA region with a focus to drive digital growth in that region. We negotiated after some considerable business development activity and were awarded a substantial deal with the Ministry of Education in the UAE. This was a 7-year multi-million subscription deal to provide a blended offering around K through 12 curriculum for all of math and science. Now, this deal had huge visibility because of the value. Its sponsor at the client end was His Excellency the Minister of Education, because he was recently appointed, and so he was pushing forward a new curriculum to be launched in the start of the new academic year in August. Very quickly, we found out that, the scope, the content was a lot, all of math, all of science. But what needed to be done was to put that content into context, so adapt it into Arabic. So we quickly found out that there's lots of versions of Arabic, and finding the appropriate version for Arabic was a challenge in itself. But then we also needed to adapt that content culturally. So every image, every photograph, every drawing, every picture that was peppered throughout all this content needed to be reviewed and, if necessary, adapted to the culture of the UAE. No mean task, which required multiple suppliers because no one could really cope with that amount of content in what was a very short period of time, because it took us a long time to negotiate the contract. And then by the time we started to implement, we were down to just a few weeks as opposed to a few months. To further complicate things, we were entering into periods of the Ramadan, and so that needed to be accommodated inside the program. So you have a very visible program with a large monetary value, very complex scope, multiple suppliers working across different countries, multiple time zones. And I took a deep breath and sort of dug deep to say, how on earth are we going to pull this off? And I come back again to what I've learned, right through my career, which, these programs are all about the capability and the team and the conditions of success that you create. And I'll give you a definition of an author that's, a definition of what we call a high-performing team by Katzenbach, that says, a high-performing team is a team of small people with complementary skills who are committed to a common purpose, performance goals and approach, and who hold themselves mutually accountable. And that's at the heart of what I believe is creating the conditions for success. So selecting individuals, parachuting them and dedicating them into the program, not asking them to take this as an add-on to a full-time role already. It's necessary. Having that complementarity of skills, and then inspiring them that this was a once in a lifetime opportunity to work on delivering a solution for an entire nation. You don't often get to work on something as visible as that, as huge as that. So they felt inspired. They felt supported by the leadership. Decisions were being made at pace, but they were also empowered as experts to make decisions, because we were working across multiple time zones. We were not in the same room. We didn't have a nice war room and huddled every morning. So we're working virtually all of the time, but also recognizing that the small wins and suddenly when we delivered the first phase, which we did, unbeknown to the team, what I'd been doing was capturing the narrative, the stories through photographs and so on. And then I worked with the marketing team and we stitched together the whole experience into a visualization of the journey, which became the symbol of a winning team, if you like, with our group CEO, visibly supporting it and celebrating it. And we pulled it off because the team believed it was something worth doing. They felt recognized, they felt empowered, they felt inspired, supported, and ultimately rewarded, not just through getting a bonus, but as I said, symbolically through this video that says, we did this together as one team. So that's certainly something that I will always remember, and I feel very sort of proud and humbled to have been part of that.
What a piece of work. Fantastic. And so, Kate, one of the things that Practicus has been building over the last couple of years is our community model, and that is designed to try and provide practical support to individuals. And you were talking then about inspiring your team, supporting your team. Over your career, has there been any individuals or any support that you've received that has helped you on your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, I think I've worked with some incredible leaders who gave me some fantastic opportunities very earlier on in my career to work on these digital transformations. And, you learn by doing and being a practitioner, but importantly, they invested in me through formal training. So they invested in me to go to business schools and did various formal training qualifications, but they also provided a coach earlier on, which really helped me a lot to understand the skills that I needed to develop to do this job, to discuss with them in a safe environment, if you like, the challenges that I was coming up against. And so by doing, but by also getting formal training and coaching along the way, has certainly been a way of me to getting more comfortable and building a toolkit, if you like, of doing this. But I also share a quote with you from Winston Churchill, which I think is very apt, which says, success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. And so I think as individuals, when you're working on these big transformational initiatives, you need to have the courage, the resilience, the conviction to keep going when things get tough, and the ultimate belief that you're building a team that also feels empowered and is going to help deliver with all that. And more often than not, I think that's the way to look at it. And this quote sort of reminds me that digital transformations are an ongoing effort, and so it does require all of us to have that resilience to keep going and also keep learning. I'm still learning from doing this, and every time you pick something new and you embrace that change and the learnings and you use them in your next initiative.
Well, what a way to end. What a great quote. Yeah. Kate, thanks so much for joining us. That's been fascinating. And if anyone's got any questions for Kate or anything they'd like to talk about specifically to her experience or how she could add value to your digital transformation agenda, you can find her on LinkedIn at Kate Holden. You can find me at james.rosen@practicus.com.
And me at dave.kemble@practicus.com.
Thanks so much, Kate. All the best.
Thank
Speak
you.
soon.
Brilliant speaking to you, Kate. Thanks.
Thank you.
That's a wrap.